Chips are made with real corn, matzo flour, are
Okay, so I have, if the Coral Crusaders, the Castaways, and the Beach Bums could, the presenters could unmute their microphones, and first up will be the Coral Crusaders. So whoever is presenting for the Coral Crusaders can go ahead and let me know, identify yourself, and with your microphone unmuted, and I will make you a co-host. So please speak up and let me know who needs to be made a co-host here.
Douglas.
Hi, my name is Allison Hansen. I'm in the Coral Crusaders.
Okay, you're now co-host. And the co-host, who's,
Wait. The Allison's not the co-host. Douglas is
okay,
for Coral Crusaders.
okay. Well, you're both co-hosts. And who is going to be speaking? Is that Caroline for the Castaways?
No. I'm Coral Crusaders.
I know, but who's the presenter for Castaways? Are they on yet? What about Beach Bums? Do you have a presenter, please? Please identify yourself if you have a presenter.
Yeah, it's Morgan Young.
So you're presenting for the Beach Bums?
Yeah, I'm clicking the slides.
Okay, great. And then, is it Christine? Who is it that's speaking for Castaways? Are you here?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not seeing your, let's see. So go ahead and start speaking, please, so I can find your screen.
Hello.
Say your name, please.
This is Anna.
Okay, Anna Lewis.
Yes, I'm not screen sharing though. Christina's screen sharing.
Okay. Christine, I can't find your little screen here. I need to know where you are. Christine, can you please speak up? Maybe you need to unmute your audio. All right, well, hopefully Christine will
I'm right here.
okay. Are you Christina Ramirez? No, I'm not finding your screen, your little icon.
Christina Ramazzano.
Okay. All right, great. Sorry about that, but you're now co-host. Okay, so we're going to start very shortly here. So with the Coral Crusaders, I will stop sharing my screen, and the Coral Crusaders, who's ever showing the slides, can show that and go ahead and begin your presentation. So share your slides. Everybody on your team can unmute. Everybody else should mute. And then we'll hear the presentation on climate threats to coral reef biodiversity. Go ahead, please.
Can you see it?
Great. Yeah, perfect.
Can see
Perfect. Yeah, that looks great.
All right, so our project was on climate threats to coral reef biodiversity. The majority of Earth systems rely on coral reef ecosystems. Millions of different marine species rely on coral reefs for their livelihood. The multiple different and unique characteristics of coral reefs make them vital in maintaining marine biodiversity. Coral reefs are found all throughout the world's oceans. Some reefs thrive in shallow, warm waters, while others mainly grow at deep depths. Aside from marine organisms, humans are dependent on coral reefs. Billions of individuals rely on coral reefs for food, climate protection, tourism, medical discoveries, as well as scientific resources. Without coral reefs, our Earth would fail to successfully function, as many habitats, organisms, and other ecosystems would seriously be impacted by their loss. In today's world, there are multiple threats that are harming coral reefs, one of which is climate change. Specifically, climate change has led to continual increase in coral bleaching events, ocean acidification, and the severity of storms that will fundamentally change these highly biodiverse ecosystems. If the levels of coral bleaching, ocean acidification, and storm severity continue to increase at current rates, the biodiversity found amongst coral reefs will plunge. Due to this fact, climate change and how it influences reefs has become a current frequent topic of study in the scientific community. Throughout this presentation, we will examine the effects of climate change on coral reefs, anthropogenic effects of the decline of reef health, current measures being taken to mitigate reef degradation, and what the future of coral reefs will look like. Our study of coral reefs and climate changes and impacts on them will effectively summarize the general points of concern, granting an understanding which we hope will bring awareness and promote advocacy. And so our presentation will talk about ocean acidification, coral bleaching, and increased storm severity and frequency. Now I'm going to hand it over to Juliet to talk about ocean acidification.
All right, so ocean acidification refers to an increase in ocean water acidity, obviously, as a result of an increased concentration of carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is formed when carbon dioxide absorbed from the atmosphere combines with ocean water. Ocean acidification is a symptom of the larger issue of global warming, as fossil fuels are burned and greenhouse gases such as CO2 are released. The ocean absorbs and takes in some of these gases. About 30% of all CO2 emitted into the atmosphere is absorbed by our ocean. And since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when we saw a major increase in fossil fuel burnings about 200 years ago, there's been a 26% increase in overall ocean acidity and a 0.1 pH unit decrease. Next slide. So as carbonic acid concentration increases, it causes a reduction in the abundance of carbonate ions available in the ocean water. So what this means is calcifying organisms which use carbonate ions in order to form calcium carbonate to create hard, stony exoskeletons or shells aren't able to get enough of that ion. And so those shells are eroded over time as the carbonic acid eats away at the calcium bicarbonate that's formed, and less ions are available to be fixed into calcium carbonate. Next slide, please. So a few of these calcifying organisms that are affected, obviously we think of corals. So corals are made up of both an active algal component and a hard stony skeleton made out of calcium carbonate. And this skeleton lives on after the living part of the animal has died and provides structural foundations for new generations of reef organisms to form on top of. Additionally, sea urchins with their sharp spines are made of calcium carbonate. These protect reefs from algal overgrowth by grazing. And if not present, these sea urchins are unable to control algal blooms, which can obstruct sunlight from penetrating the ocean surface, impacting coral life and other submerged aquatic vegetation, which provide food and dissolved oxygen to other reef organisms. Finally, mollusks like giant clams and gastropods form their shells out of calcium carbonate. And again, these shells remain after the animal has died and provide structural support, promote biodiversity in the reef, and allow new organisms to fix too.
Okay, so how does climate change harm coral reef biodiversity? One of the ways it does this is it causes coral bleaching. So what is coral bleaching? It results from an increase, or in some cases, a decrease in ocean water temperature. Basically, how it happens is coral has a symbiotic relationship with an algae in its tissues, and a change in temperature or other stressors causes the coral to lose this algae. And the bleaching, the whitening that you see is actually a stress response from the coral from the loss of the relationship. And so it's natural for corals to lose 0.1%, but obviously in bleaching it loses way more than that. So there's local scale bleaching and there's mass bleaching. Mass bleaching is what you see when like water temperature changes, whereas local scale is from stressors like cyanide fishing, disease, pollution, etc. And then there's a couple misconceptions, as you can see in the figure in the middle of the slide. Bleached coral does not mean it's dead. bleached coral can actually recover given enough time and if the water temperature goes back to normal. Next slide, please. So how does climate change specifically affect bleaching? So global warming increases, as we know, due to rise in anthropogenic greenhouse gases. This rise in temperature raises ocean water, which is the primary cause.
Give me my backpack, please.
So as long as global warming continues, these bleaching events will become more
It gets
frequent
hot in
and
here.
actually
It's okay then.
more severe. So with growing local pressures and mass bleaching events, it'll cause us to lose these ecosystems.
Thank you.
So the picture on the slide is actually an example of a global bleaching event in 2014 that actually affected 38 different reefs at one time, which is crazy. But a good example is Poama, which is from Australia. Wait, can y'all hear me? Oh, wait, sorry. Anyway, Poama is used, and it's actually a model, and it uses data collected from ocean atmosphere, ice, and land to predict future climate forecasts. So if we can predict future climate forecasts, we can predict when bleaching is going to occur. So scientists can actually find ways to protect the reefs in advance. Next slide, please. Finally, coral reefs, why are they important? Why is coral bleaching important? So coral reefs harbor the highest biodiversity of any ecosystem. If you look at the image in the right corner, you can read some interesting facts about coral reefs, like 75% of reefs are already threatened. Actually, every reef region in the world has now suffered extensive stress or coral mortality of some sort. And bleaching events alone have destroyed a total of 16% of the world's reefs. So we've already lost 16% of these ecosystems. There have been numerous large-scale bleaching events. The image in the left corner shows the percentage of reefs affected by coral bleaching. The white is moderate and the black is severe bleaching, and the locations are listed. But two examples of these large-scale bleaching events. One is the Great Barrier Reef from 2016 to 2017 lost 50% of its corals, which is crazy because Great Barrier Reef is the largest coral reef ecosystem. And then in 2005, US lost half of coral reefs in the Caribbean due to a bleaching event. So it just shows how vulnerable these reefs are. And if bleaching continues as it is now, millions of species will be left without a habitat. And not only that, but we as humans will be affected as well, because we rely on these reefs for so many ecosystem services. And so climate change just really threatens these vulnerable coral reef ecosystems and have long-lasting impact. So next, Tyler's going to talk about storms. So next slide.
So there's been multiple studies that's saying how storms are going to increase in severity. And there's been some about frequency too, but it's not as strong as the research on intensity. And so we know that this is going to happen further with climate change, but we have to think about whether it's going to bring a positive or a negative change. So hurricanes, they gain and lose their wind speed based on the temperature of the ocean water below. However, this is where we can figure out the positive or negatives. So on the negatives, what's causing this damage actually is the larger, more powerful waves and the storm surge that can break these coral branches and overturn whole coral colonies, as well as the heavy rainfall that's going to bring runoff from land, this sediments, and they can smother out these corals. However, there are some positives that hurricanes can actually reduce water temperature in certain areas and alleviate these corals, and this in turn helps with bleaching. So to help you guys understand whether the positive and negatives it brings, I have an analogy for you. Can you go next slide, please? my analogy for you is essentially think of coral reefs as the forest of the ocean. They're very diverse. They create an ecosystem to sustain life. And this is similar to a forest. Same thing, you know, we have a whole bunch of kind of life, and it's sustains, it creates ecosystem for creatures. And in this analogy, hurricanes are just like wildfires. You know, they're disrupting the ecosystem and they're damaging these corals similar to a wildfire, you know, it disrupts. But this isn't necessarily a bad thing. If I brought two before and after pictures of a forest and a coral reef, and you can see it's very similar. You know, on the left before picture, it's very dense, you know, it's crowding out new growth. You're just having old growth corals and trees. However, after a disturbance, you allow new growth. So in the sense of corals, you know, it is allowing new growth to come back. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, when we're relating it back to climate change, this is when the problem comes in. These corals that are being weakened from bleaching and ocean acidification, you know, these storms might be able to wipe out these weakened coral. You know, when you have a strong established ecosystem, they're able to bounce back a little more. But when they're weakened, this does bring a unaccountable variable that can damage them. And I'll go on to the next slide, please. You know, now I go on to the future of coral reefs with respect to these storms and climate change. You know, I brought a little graph on the right, upper right. You can see that when the temperature is down lower, each one of those letters is actually a hurricane, and it brings down the water temperature. So it is bringing some relief to them. So what you got to understand is it's not necessarily wiping out these corals. You know, I don't know if hurricanes have that potential to wipe out whole coral ecosystems, but we're essentially fundamentally changing what these ecosystems are like. I like this next point. You know, these strong storms cause the fragile branching species, the one that are responsible for the complexity of the reefs, to decline more rapidly. And what's left are these massive corals with low structural complexity. So with these storms plus climate change, you know, we might have a shift of coral reef biodiversity to become more of these low structural complexity reefs. And along with my last point, you know, these reefs are going to need longer times to recover between each impact of a storm. So it is uncertain for the future, but with all these effects of climate change, we have to come to a conclusion with that. And that's my slides.
So today I'm going to talk about the deficits in U.S. policy towards the protection of coral reefs against climate change before going into some recommendations for future policy. So the main law in place in the United States that protects coral reefs is the Clean Water Act. So this is enforced by the EPA, and it mainly protects against pollution from entering the watershed that discharges into reefs. So this is unrelated to climate change, although it is helpful for coral reef protection. So reefs are also protected by national park designation. However, this mainly protects against harmful human activities that directly affect the coral reefs, such as harmful boating or pollution, rather than the less direct effects of climate change. And finally, current governance structures generally consider reef habitat to be shallower than 20 to 30 meters down. So this doesn't affect the mesophotic reefs, which provide important propagules that help restore the shallower reefs that actually are protected. So these mesophotic zones are becoming increasingly more important as time goes on, when you consider the protection of shallower reefs and just reefs as a whole. So next slide, please. So in order to address the deficits that are currently in place, laws need to be made that decrease carbon emissions and slow the progression of climate change, obviously. And this would trickle down to the oceanic habitat and help
prevent harmful effects of climate change on the reefs. And so this can be anything from a nationwide carbon cap or a cap and trade policy that prevents industrial emissions from exceeding a certain point. And this would help prevent an increase in acidity due to the decreased carbon emissions, as well as an international effort to reduce carbon emissions, such as the ones that were made with the Paris Agreement, except the US actually needs to stay in the agreement, and this will help reduce the effects of climate change on the ocean. And finally, collectively, we need to live more sustainable lifestyles that employ good habits such as carpooling, reducing meat consumption, and recycling. So next slide.
So in summary, coral reefs are really fragile ecosystems, but they also contain a large diversity of ocean life. Coral reef systems are threatened by effects of mostly human activity and climate change, including increasingly intense storm systems from global warming, as well as warming waters and ocean acidification. Coral reef systems, they only tolerate a very narrow range of temperatures and conditions that makes them very fragile ecosystems. So just a few degrees in the change of water can really have devastating effects on these systems. But fortunately, there are many options that we can take as a society to help protect these ecosystems, as well as other ecosystems on Earth, including implementing environmental protection policies, environmental laws, and following these laws and procedures. And we can also, of course, protect the reefs from poaching and managing wastewaters from factories, and overall reducing carbon footprints. Next slide. In conclusion, we want to look into what the future could hold for coral reefs. If we start now in terms of reducing carbon footprints and taking measurements to reduce global warming, we can hopefully halt or at least slow down and reverse the damage that has been done to the coral reef systems. And coral reefs are, of course, are one of Earth's most fragile ecosystems, and they are also one of the first ecosystems to be affected by climate change. And but if we do not address climate change now, as well as pollution, poaching, these ecosystems will collapse in the near future. Through environmental efforts and protection, we can still save coral reefs and other unique ecosystems and help stop harmful practices, and we can restore the damages. Things like global warming is going to require a net effort by the global population, and each and every one of us, we need to really take steps to reduce our carbon footprints. It's not just one company, it's not just one country, it's all of us that need to participate. Next slide.
Okay, so thank you very much to this group here. Thank you to the Coral Crusaders for this presentation. And we'll now open it up for questions. I have a question to start out, but I encourage the students to ask questions as well. And when you ask questions, you can unmute yourself by pressing on your space bar. But unless you're presenting or part of the team that's presenting, please keep yourself muted because we hear things in the background. So my question to the Coral Crusaders is, how much would local actions, like protecting reefs from pollution or from impact due to fishing or other impacts, how much do you think that would help corals to be able to resist the more sort of regional global impacts of climate change, ocean warming, acidification, etc.?
I'll answer it in terms of coral bleaching. Specifically, I know that because on a local scale, if you cut back on those, coral will also have more time to recover. So it'll be able, rather than just bleaching and then dying, if it keeps getting hit by different stressors, it'll be able to have its time and the water temperature to be able to recover and fight off future bleaching events.
Great, thank you. Other questions from the class? Okay, if there are no questions, I'll ask everybody to hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, and on the right there, you'll see a button that says reactions. So I'd ask you to click on that button, and then there's a little sign that says either clap or thumbs up. And if everybody would do that, we could give this nice presentation a round of applause. Thank you, everybody, and thanks to the Coral Crusaders for that nice presentation. Okay, next up are the castaways. And so if the Coral Crusaders could please mute their microphone, and the castaways could please load their event there, and we'll get started. I'll start the Okay, please go ahead and start your presentation, castaways.
Okay, so we are the castaways, and our presentation is on the iron fertilization experiment.
I think you need to switch to presentation mode because you still have the other parts of the screen showing there.
All right, is it good now?
It's still frozen.
Yeah, you need to click on the view and go presentation mode.
Sorry, where's the presentation mode?
Under at the upper right, upper left, you'll see view. And if you click on their presentation, it should make it full screen. Your presentation should be full screen. I think you were there before, but if you click on the upper left there where it says view, and you click on view and change it to presentation mode.
Yeah, I'm not seeing view anywhere on the screen.
Okay.
It looks like it's full screen on my screen.
Okay, all right, well, go ahead then. Sorry, I'm distracted.
Okay.
Wait, it's
Okay.
not full screen on the other ones.
Okay.
In Google Docs, try clicking present in the upper right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a there you go. There's the present button. Click on that, please.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can everyone see it now?
I think it's still
I think it
frozen.
froze again.
Okay. I clicked present and now it's in. I'm seeing full screen.
I can go ahead and share it if you make me a host with it.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think if everybody makes it full screen, we'll be able to see. I think we need to just go ahead here because we've used up almost 5 minutes of your time. So
Okay.
let's go ahead. Just go ahead and start your presentation, I guess, and we'll sort that out later.
Okay. So high nutrient, low chlorophyll zones are zones of the ocean which, despite having an abundance of macronutrients, show a relatively low amount of phytoplankton activity. Iron fertilization is a concept which consists of fortifying HNLC zones with iron as a way of stimulating phytoplankton growth. Throughout history, there have been many attempts to work out an explanation and a solution to HNLC zones, and over the past few decades, there have been several experiments designed to develop a better understanding of it. However, a great deal of uncertainty is still present, and this is due in large part to the complex scientific background associated with iron fertilization and the conflicting results of recent research. But regardless of these difficulties, it is important to understand the phenomenon, because the health of many ecosystems in the ocean, which many cultures and economies heavily rely on, is intrinsically linked to healthy phytoplankton growth.
The experiments are conducted worldwide and have created the need to create a global dialogue.
You need to advance to the next slide.
I think she still has problem with the screen being frozen from the screen sharing.
Yeah, I am seeing the next slide. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on, but I mean, it looks totally normal to me, so I don't really know what anyone else is seeing, but.
Well, I'm still seeing the working mode and the thumbnails on the left-hand side of the screen and the first, the opening introduction screen. So you're not advancing.
If the host can just disable the attendee screen sharing from being locked, and then one of us can open it up, because I think it might just be a technical problem.
Okay, let me try to do that. Okay, who else wants to present in the from that group?
It's Kevin Olenichuk.
Okay, Kevin, let me try to find your screen. Okay, Kevin, why don't you go ahead and share your screen, and Christina, please stop sharing your screen. Great, that's perfect. I see that now.
Okay, so discourse of the practice. The experiments are conducted worldwide and have created the need to create a global dialogue. As the greenhouse gas concentrations continue to warm the planet, there is increased pressure to take action to remedy the problem. One potential solution to decrease the greenhouse gas, CO2, is to use iron fertilization as a way to promote phytoplankton growth in order to sequester CO2 out of the atmosphere. However, there has not been a unanimous agreement whether or not iron fertilization experiments should be conducted. Some of the discourse attached to the practice include the critique of IOF treatments to be considered bioengineering, saying it is an attempt to manipulate the natural world. This is considered controversial because critics say that the focus should be to decrease carbon emissions and not to try to create a quick, cheap solution to the problem. Other pushback can be seen from climate change deniers who reject the need to decrease carbon concentrations and can impact the length and efficiency of the experiments through policy. Some other responses to the practice that bring attention to the fact that these experiments would have global impacts, because experiments are conducted in the high seas where no one nation or entity has complete control. So these experiments and manipulations of the environment can cause international conflicts due to global backlash or conflicts created through potential commercialization of the practice. Next.
So this is the outline. We basically have Christina talking about topic 1, which is background and history. Sophia is talking about topic 3, the discourse of the practice. Nalina is talking about topic 3, the mechanics. Anna is talking about topic 3, the implications, economic and societal, and the uncertainties in the research. Savannah is talking about weighing pros and cons and the summary. And then I'm talking about topic 2, the mechanics, the chemical processes, and then we all came together for the conclusion.
Two of the most noteworthy scientists who contributed to the concept of iron fertilization are Joseph Hart and John Martin. Joseph Hart was one of the first scientists to seriously consider specific nutrient content of HNLC zones and suggest that low iron levels in particular contributed to low phytoplankton activity. Hart suggested this idea in the 1930s, and though it held great potential, it was largely left alone until the 1990s. At this time, oceanographer John Martin had recently finished working on his vertical transport and exchange projects, which focused on carbon cycling in the ocean. It was these projects which led him to the idea that low iron levels in HNLC zones could be contributing to low phytoplankton activity. He then conducted an experiment that would ignite widespread scientific interest in iron fertilization. Next slide, please. When Martin tested the waters of Antarctic HNLC zones, he found very little iron present. He hypothesized that iron was an important micronutrient for phytoplankton development, and he designed an experiment to test his position. For the experiment, Martin sent his team to Antarctica and had them take water samples from HNLC regions. He then added iron to some bottles and manganese to others, while leaving additional samples untouched as a control group. In all samples, phytoplankton levels were monitored to see how much they were growing. Nutrient levels were monitored to see how much of the nutrient was being consumed. Phytoplankton activity dramatically increased in iron-fortified samples alone. This is depicted in the figure, which shows only iron-treated samples had a significantly increased chlorophyll level and decreased nitrate levels. Martin's hypothesis was supported by his experiment, but the complicated nature of the science surrounding iron fertilization, as well as conflicting results from later studies, have hindered its widespread acceptance. Next slide.
I'll discuss the oceanic carbon cycle and how it works. So first, carbon dioxide enters the ocean's surface and breaks down among dissolved inorganic carbons. That'll be your carbon dioxide that's dissolved, bicarbonate, and carbonate. Phytoplankton goes through photosynthesis. Primary production converts the DIC into organic molecules, so particulate organic molecules there on the side. And some of it actually forms particulate inorganic carbon, but they'll all be grouped together. And zooplankton will graze the phytoplankton and either expel the dissolved organic carbon or respire the dissolved organic carbon back into inorganic carbon. All the particulate inorganic and organic carbons are grouped together, and much of it will be respired back into inorganic carbon also, but a fraction of it will sink out of the surface layer as PIC or POC, or be transported from the surface layer by mixing and advecting of DOC. That's just your dissolved organic carbon again. Most of the particulate organic carbon and inorganic carbon and the dissolved organic carbon remineralize into the DIC using dissolved oxygen, which can cause gases such as nitrogen and nitrous oxide to form in water parcels, which will eventually reach the surface layer again, especially when the oxygen is limited. But the part that doesn't remineralize, at that point, it will sink even further, and a fraction of it is buried in the sediment layer. That's going to be the POC and the PIC here. And if it's not buried, it'll go through diagenesis and also go back to the dissolved inorganic carbon state. So as you can see, a lot of it actually goes back into dissolved inorganic carbon throughout the whole process. This is how phytoplankton removes CO2 from the atmosphere, increases the CO2 content in the ocean. phytoplankton incorporates carbon dioxide into itself during primary production and sinks and decays, and that releases carbon dioxide. And sometimes it's deep enough into the ocean where the carbon dioxide can be kept for a long time. For sequestration to be feasible, the return time of the dissolved inorganic carbon must be long enough, and that's about decades, and the nutrients must return before the dissolved inorganic carbon or at the same time. Next slide, please.
So, one second. Iron fertilization's chemical process is based off the introducing iron into high nutrient, low chlorophyll zones that would cause algal blooms because iron is a nutrient that is needed in very low quantities. These high nutrient, low chlorophyll zones are, as they say, contain high levels of nutrients needed for phytoplankton to bloom, but have low amounts of chlorophyll because there are not phytoplankton blooming in those regions. Naturally, the ocean would be supplied by windswept oils being blown into the ocean, with that very little amount of oil only containing between 2 and 5% iron. The trace amounts of iron are able to seed algal blooms in high nutrient, low chlorophyll zones. The Redfield ratio, discovered by Alfred C. Redfield in 1934, is a ratio of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and other trace elements in marine phytoplankton, and it shows that trace amounts of iron can cause large biomasses of algal blooms that then absorb large amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The Redfield ratio says that it was written as with carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus first, and it was written as 106 carbons to 16 nitrogens to 1 phosphorus, meaning that 1 atom of phosphorus and 16 atoms of nitrogens are required to fix 106 atoms of carbon, or 106 molecules of carbon dioxide. They expanded this to find that the ratio then included 0.001 iron in it, meaning that in iron deficient zones, they wouldn't be able to cause algal blooms because it needed the iron. In iron deficient conditions, each iron atom can fix 106,000 carbon atoms or of iron, and can fix 83,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide. 1 kilogram of iron dispersed in high nutrient, low chlorophyll zones can trigger a phytoplankton bloom with a biomass of 100,000 kilograms. Next.
Okay, so the Southern Ocean Iron Experiment is one of the experiments held. It was separated into a North and South experiment because a macronutrient, silicic acid, had different concentrations at each region. That being said, for the experiments in boats, an iron solution with a sulfur hexafluoride tracer was added to patches of water. Additions of iron were given to exceed saturation for phytoplankton growth. And then phytoplankton growth occurred as a result of the iron addition, and the particulate carbon exports from blooms in the deep sea ocean were measured. The North experiment used a profiler that was set at 100 meters in depth and recorded the carbon flux that way, while the South used a tracer called thorium-234, and it's a unique chemical that can be identified in a sample. This experiment supported the idea that iron was a limiting factor and increased photosynthetic competency. Particulate carbon exports were quantifiable, so they could measure it, but the ocean iron fertilization carbon flux was small compared to a natural bloom. So a natural bloom actually sequestered carbon dioxide better, I apologize. Next slide, please. So that experiment indicated how iron increased biological productivity in the high nutrient, low chlorophyll zones. You can see them pointed out with these arrows on the map here. That increased productivity would enhance sequestering carbon dioxide because the phytoplankton would incorporate the carbon dioxide into itself during primary production, and then it would sink deep enough in the ocean where the carbon dioxide could be released after it decayed, and it could be kept because the deeper ocean's pressure and temperature. That being said, the carbon flux from the iron fertilization experiment, again, was not comparable to the natural bloom. And this was just one of quite a few experiments that occurred. You can see more here in this map. The SOFEX experiment is another way to call it, which you can point out with the red arrows again. They gave some insight on how ocean iron fertilization can be used for mitigation when showing the carbon flux records, but it, along with the experiments held, had the main goal of finding iron's role in the carbon cycle. They weren't long enough or large enough to give us all the information on how efficient it could be or and consequently, there were a lot of uncertainties still surrounding it. So if they want to conduct future experiments, researchers suggest defining a clear mitigation goal, trying to approximate the amount of carbon dioxide released to the atmosphere, assess the ocean's capability for sequestering incomparable amounts, find some consequences, and find if using ocean ion fertilization to sequester carbon dioxide can be unambiguously verified. And that's because the ocean is so large and turbulent, it would be very hard to keep up with everything. Next slide, please.
Okay, so there are obviously lots of economic implications that go along with ocean ion fertilization. We can actually create a market for carbon credits that can be earned or traded or sold to offset carbon emissions. We currently do this already on land through carbon credits used with forests. However, there also is a great potential in the ocean to have a market for carbon credits. Lots of studies have been done that show that the ocean has potential to sequester much greater amounts of carbon than on land. And currently, carbon credits on land are about $75 per ton of carbon and $20 per ton of carbon dioxide. So this could be a very profitable market. The 1997 Kyoto Protocol kind of set limits or caps on emissions that industries could produce. So the protocol had member countries sign on, and when you sign on to this protocol, certain industries in those member nations were given limits to how much greenhouse gas they could emit annually. And so carbon credits are a great way that these industries can offset the emissions that they're producing annually. And then following the Kyoto Protocol, the 2016 Paris Agreement was the most recent agreement on mitigating climate change and reporting emissions from member countries. So as we can see in this image on the top right corner, this is the nations that have signed on to the Paris Agreement, and that is 197 different states. The dark green are the ones that have ratified it. The light green are the ones who have signed it but haven't ratified it yet. And then the red is the ones who are withdrawing, which is only the United States. So this agreement is a little different than the Kyoto Protocol in the fact that it doesn't have specific limits that industries can emit annually. However, you must report your attempts and your plans for mitigating CO2 emissions. So that's kind of the difference between those two pieces of legislation. And then lastly, for economic implications, it has been proposed that fertilizing 1/5 of these high nutrient low chlorophyll zones could potentially have a market of $100 billion of atmospheric CO2 mitigation every year. Okay, next slide. So there's also societal implications that go along with this. This is a lot more ambiguous than the economic implications. Just kind of a general overview, the land has always been treated differently than oceans. Just a quick example is the concept of private property on land compared to where the oceans has pretty much always been seen as territory for all. The majority of iron fertilization would occur in international waters. So this is 200 nautical miles offshore. The 1996 London Protocol prohibits dumping in these waters with a few exceptions. So it's kind of debated on how nations will see this, if they will see iron fertilization as dumping or not under the London Protocol. So that's up for debate. And then also kind of just a general overview, every nation has completely different laws and regulations in regards to how we use our oceans. So it is going to prove very challenging to create international law that will regulate iron fertilization in these waters. Next slide. Okay, and then there's obviously lots of uncertainties in research, as we've already touched on a lot, so I'll just go over this quickly. Currently, we just haven't done enough research or experiments on the side effects of ocean iron fertilization, whether these be positive or negative side effects. The only experiments we've done so far have been small scale. They've been small scale in the open ocean or in labs or computer simulations. We just don't know how this will be affected on a large scale. We also are extremely unsure on how much carbon can be sequestered in the ocean, depending from region to region and we're unsure of the amount of time that carbon can be sequestered in different areas. So the scientific community overall agrees that this is a very speculative topic and not at all ready for commercial consideration. We still need an international agreement. So that is something that we are looking to in the future. Next slide.
Okay, so there's many pros and cons of increasing the population of phytoplankton by adding iron. Most of these are hypothetical and uncertain, as she said, because there's little to no firm research directly on these effects of adding iron. But just to begin, plankton take carbon and sequester it. So this, of course, mitigates global warming by helping to decrease the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. But there are many uncertainties. We don't know how long it would be stored there. We also don't know if all of this actually makes it to decay. Plankton could just be reabsorbed into the food web, eaten by, and go back to the food web. Also, one pro is that it increases biological productivity. So increasing the amount of phytoplankton increases the amount of fish, but we also don't know if this could have an adverse effect and actually create blooms, decreasing nutrient availability and decreasing the light penetration in the ocean. It could increase only specific populations like jellyfish, algae, etc. So one negative is that increasing phytoplankton actually increases the release of dimethyl sulfide, which can have a good and bad effect. Increasing dimethyl sulfide actually helps water droplets condense and form clouds, which can help global warming. But on the other hand, in the ocean, it could actually lower water visibility. Phytoplankton also increases methyl halides, which actually deplete ozone. So increasing the amount of phytoplankton also increases the amount of decomposition occurring in the ocean, which takes oxygen, releases carbon dioxide, effectively creating dead zones and anoxic conditions for other animals. Phytoplankton also, when being decomposed, the particulate matter that sinks to the bottom of the ocean contains methane and nitrous oxide. If this were to be upwelled, it would actually contribute as a potent greenhouse gas into the atmosphere and could have negative effects. Yes, next slide, please.
I think you're going to need to stop there. Very, very briefly go this summary because you're now out of time. So go ahead and give your summary very quickly, please.
Okay, so 1/3 of the surface ocean is limited by the lack of iron, the growth of phytoplankton. So adding the iron actually stimulates the growth, which increases the amount of carbon dioxide that's sequestered into the ocean, sinking and reaching depths where they can be stored for hundreds of years or more. The research is actually inconclusive on the effectiveness, practicality, and number of adverse effects that the addition of iron may have. Therefore, we've concluded as a group that more research needs to be done before we artificially affect the number of iron in the ocean.
Okay, we're going to have to stop there. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but I'm sure that the team would be able to respond if you have any questions, and they have uploaded a quiz, so I'll go ahead. And our next up will be the beach bums, and they're going to talk about plastics in the ocean. So go ahead and bring up your screen, please, and whenever you're ready, go ahead and get started.
Can everyone see that?
Yes, I can see it. Looks good.
Perfect.
All right. Hello, everyone. Our group's topic is plastics, specifically the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the destructive tendencies of plastic pollution in the Pacific Ocean. Next slide. So what we're going to do during this presentation, we will first define the problem of plastics specifically in the Pacific Ocean, then move on into the effects that stem from it. And after, we will provide the researched potential solutions and conclude our topic. So to start us off, Destiny will explain the plastic problems in the Pacific.
Okay, so plastic is a super big problem in the ocean, but it's really big in the Pacific Ocean. And that's probably due to the fact that the Pacific Ocean is the biggest ocean in the world. It stretches 63.8 million square miles. So it's the largest ocean in the world.
I think you need to advance your slide.
So who's sharing it?
Do you need to go to the next slide?
Yeah, I'm not sharing it.
I did advance it to the next slide.
Okay.
I still see the first one, but I can keep talking. There's this thing in the Pacific Ocean called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it's this big giant mass of plastic debris between Hawaii and California, and it's made up of all kinds of plastic litter, plastic bags, water bottles, fishing nets, all kinds of plastic debris. And the Pacific Garbage Patch is actually made up of two. I don't know if you guys can see the slide. I can't. It's really small, but it's actually made up of two little tiny patches. There's an eastern and a western patch that are made up. They like go together, and they swirl around in the gyre, the Pacific Gyre. And we've actually known about the patch since the 80s, but a study in 2018 led us to the approximate size. So the patch covers an area about 3 times the size of the country of France, and it holds about 79,000 tons of plastic, which is a lot. And so at the sea surface of this area, there's actually more plastic than natural prey. So animals feeding in this area are actually more likely to consume plastic than like animals or whatever they're supposed to eat. So that's why plastic is actually a big part of their diet.
So I don't think that your slides are advancing. You need to like reload or something because they're not advancing. Go ahead, try to get them.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so
try to do it like this. Can you guys see if I advance the slides now?
I see the plastic in the Pacific Ocean. That's all I see. Have you advanced?
I have. Someone else is welcome to try, but I don't know why it's not letting you all see.
Dr. McDonald, if you want to make me the presenter, this is Kinsey Mullins. I can try it.
Okay. Go ahead, Kenzie.
Okay.
So you have to
Can you
share
guys
your
see this?
And then whoever was sharing before should stop sharing their screen, and then Kenzie will be able to share her screen.
Yes, sir. I'm not sharing anymore.
Okay, Kenzie.
Can you guys see when I advance now?
I can't even see.
You need to share your screen.
Down at the bottom of the page, there's a little green arrow that says share screen. There you go. Perfect.
Got it?
Got it. Way to go.
And can we see when I advance?
Yes, that worked great.
Great. Okay.
Okay, so I know I kept talking, but I'm just gonna go back to when I was talking about the two parts of the garbage patch. So there's an eastern and a western at this picture on the left. And there's actually, so there's two parts, and it's in the gyre. And then they're doing cleanup efforts. That's this picture in the middle. And it's like this picture specifically, they're putting out buoys and nets to try to catch all the litter. And then in the patch, it's estimated that there is 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic floating around, and this can, since there's so many, They're talking about like microplastics, so the really, really tiny pieces. And yeah, I think I covered everything about the Pacific Ocean. We can go to the next slide and Kenzie can talk about her stuff.
Yeah, so we already learned about like gyres and ocean circulation a little bit this semester, but so just for like quick review, gyres are large rotating masses of water in each of the ocean basins, and there's 5 geostrophic gyres. They're primarily driven by surface winds, and they're subject to the Coriolis effect. The gyre that we're focusing on here is the North Pacific Gyre, and since it's in the northern hemisphere, the winds are anticyclonic and it makes the water swirl clockwise. And within the North Pacific Gyre is a smaller vortex of water called the North Pacific Subtropical Gyre. And it's within that smaller gyre that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch exists. And like Destiny said before, there's an eastern patch and a western patch, but they are interconnected. And it's not just one massive chunk of garbage out in the middle of the ocean. It's more like a distribution of debris. And gyres act as large vortexes of water that can draw material in towards its center. And this is because the center of a gyre is substantially less turbulent than the outer boundary currents are. And so the calm water in the center tends to act as a zone of accumulation. And so the North Pacific subtropical currents consistently push debris into the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. The GIF here on the left is from NASA's Scientific Visualization Studio, and they created a model of what they think the accumulation of plastic looks like. And they did this using buoys deployed by NASA and NOAA. And again, it's the Coriolis effect that makes the water swirl clockwise, and because of this, plastic is consistently added to the center of the gyre. And because, as we know, plastic is not biodegradable, this accumulation is fairly consistent because the plastic just stays there. It doesn't go anywhere else. And then one thing that I found interesting while doing this research is that while the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is the largest garbage patch, it's not the only one. This photo on the right shows that there's garbage patches in all of the ocean gyres, and there's even some in some of the seas. So any body of water that's large enough to have like a vortex is capable of developing a garbage patch. And so with that, we can discuss what contributes to the garbage patch and how it affects marine life.
So it's estimated like 600,000, 800,000 metric tons of fishing gear is abandoned during storms. And this is the name for it. It's called ghost gear. So when this there was an example of where they cleaned up some ghost gear off of the coast of Mexico, and they found like 300 dead sea turtles in one of them. It takes about 600 years for just fishing lines to degrade in the ocean naturally, but keep in mind that these fishing nets aren't just made of plastics. You know, you have buoys, you have different kinds of stuff that gets thrown into these things, whether it's for commercial use or just like regular fishing people. 3/4 of the marine plastic, 74%, originates from land. 9.4% of fishing litter, 7.8% of primary microplastics, and 4.9% from shipping litter. Go to the next slide. So every year, around 8 million metric tons of plastic end up in the ocean, and it's thought that by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish by weight. Plastic does eventually break down into smaller particles called microplastics. These can be eaten by fish and end up in food eaten by humans. So like basically this plastic is affecting every level of the food chain. And as humans, as we continue to increase our population, we're going to see a more dependency on like fishing to provide for protein that we're lacking on land. So without governments getting together and just basically coming up with who's responsible for monitoring all this other stuff, there's really no one getting punished for losing this gear. So like when this hurricanes come and these ghost gear gets swept away, literally the fishermen who lost it, they don't have to report it, and no one's going to go find them to say, okay, you have to pay for 500 sea turtles and 2 whales that ended up in this gear that just drifted around and is basically swallowing up all these other loose plastics, creating in this gyre. Go ahead to the next slide. So right here, this right picture, that is an example of one of these little cleanup trips that a conservation group did. And that's how much they picked up in that. And then the left is like an accumulation. And as you can see in this accumulation, these fish are like riding around these plastics, and that causes all these other fish to come in to eat them. And that's how you get all these other different species entrapped in this. But like with this picture on the right, it's not feasible or realistic to say that these conservation groups can go out and clean up all this plastic. So eventually some kind of governmental change is going to have to take place. Go ahead and do the next slide.
Okay, so when most people think about, marine life that is affected by plastic pollution, they often think about seals or dolphins, just because that's what we see so often in the media. But plastic pollution affects every level of the food chain, from zooplankton to seals to humans. So with zooplankton, the main concern is a decreased feeding efficiency. So within the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, because there's so much debris covering such a large surface of the ocean, it's a lot harder for sunlight to get through that. And because zooplankton and algal species need to synthesize their own food, that's a lot harder to do when they don't have as much sunlight reaching through. With seals and dolphins and seabirds and animals like that, ingestion and entanglement are the main concerns there. So with ingestion, one study actually kind of looked at 50 individuals from across 10 species and found microplastics present in the digestive tracts of every single animal. So because dolphins and other marine mammals are indicators of the health of the ecosystem, the high content of microplastics found in their digestive tracts suggests that their ecosystems have been negatively impacted by plastics. And then with entanglement, the main problem is that they won't be able to eat or swim properly. They can even drown. And with the death of these animals, especially at the higher trophic levels, there's going to be a significant decrease in biodiversity. Next slide, please. Allie is going to talk a bit more about humans, but because we are a part of the food chain, I just wanted to touch on it, that the microplastics are going to start traveling up the food chain as they start to increase in levels lower in the food chain. So we will start seeing bioaccumulative and toxic substances in our food that will then, of course, get into us. But the carrying of invasive species is super interesting. So as mentioned before, it's not, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch isn't stagnant. It's not just sitting there. It's constantly moving around and rotating within the gyre. So what they're finding is that invasive species can kind of hop on a piece of debris and travel across the Pacific. And California's actually experienced this with invasive algal species that have traveled on debris from across the Pacific Ocean. Next slide.
So there are 3 big ways that plastics in the ocean can affect us as humans. One, it emits greenhouse-like gases, it decreases global amounts of oxygen, and it also contaminates food sources. So primarily, the chemicals that make up our plastic products sit in the ocean, and they start to break down and react with the ocean itself. For example, when polystyrene sits in the ocean, it begins to break down into styrene and benzene, which are carcinogens and neurotoxins that are very hazardous to humans. So not only are humans ingesting toxic, like broken down plastic waste in fish that we eat, but we're also being affected by the gases that are emitted when these chemicals break down. Also, as Morgan touched on previously, zooplankton's feeding efficiency is affected by plastics. There's a study that shows how microplastics are affecting different kinds of microorganisms and how that reduces the global amount of oxygen. All effects combined, the study reads that by 2060, there will be a decline of oxygen of 2.9%. And that number doesn't sound like a lot, but taking into account that with the decline of oxygen in the ocean, different toxic chemicals that are foreign to the ocean are actually rapidly increasing. Next slide. And another thing is BPA, which is one of the big toxins that is created through plastics, like sitting in the ocean. When it breaks down, it can enter the human body in many ways, from like drinking that water to eating a fish or eating food that comes from the ocean. In 2007, a study found out that increased levels of BPA affects a person's blood, plasma, pregnancy-associated fluids, urine, semen, and a follicular fluid. So since there has been more testing of the effects of those chemicals that incubate in the ocean and how it affects human health, the study shows more, its most recent update as of early January this year, and they've moved from testing these chemicals from like lab rats, and their next step in their testing is pigs. And what they're finding out is that the main effect of these chemicals in to health is actually like reproductive. There's mostly birth effects that these animals are showing from being from ingesting like these kinds of toxins that are produced from plastics. Next slide.
All right, so some possible solutions for limiting plastic out of the ocean. The first solution that I have here on the left is a marine drone concept designed by Elia Hovey. This marine drone is motor powered, and how it would work is it would tug a giant net at the bottom of the ocean in order to collect the plastic. It would last for approximately 2 weeks before it would return to what's a home base to be recharged and for all the plastic to be collected. So one of the biggest things in consideration of designing this concept was its impact on the marine life. So this is designed to execute a high-pitched sound to limit the risk of schools of fishes and all other marine animals from getting trapped. So another possible solution is the one on the left. One of the biggest ways that plastic gets into the ocean is through rivers. So right here, the Baltimore trash wheel, or otherwise known as Mr. Trash Wheel, removes plastic before it enters the ocean. It pumps the plastic onto a conveyor belt where it's stored into Mr. Trash Wheel. Next slide, please. So another possible solution was the microplastics ban. So the Microbead Free Waters Act of 2015 prohibited the use of microbeads, which are very destructive into our oceans. They slip through our drains without notice, and they leach into our ocean, and animals are consuming them. So in 2017, all manufacturing of microbeads in certain products like toothpaste and face wash were prohibited, and in 2018, retail sales were prohibited. However, this solution is not all-inclusive of all different kinds of microbeads. There are still certain products that still are allowed to use microbeads, like cleaning products and some makeup products. So it's just a start for this. And then we also have tracking trash. So tracking where plastic is ending up is another method. Researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology are using RFID tags and cellular transmitters to track garbage and recycling in Seattle and New York. So the purpose of such technology would be to determine the patterns of where and how the trash is traveling so we can cap it at the source. And so finally, the ocean cleanup, which is a large-scale cleanup project which uses floats to trap the trash. So these yellow floats you can see in the image here. And so there's a skirt that goes down into the water to keep the trash from flowing underneath the float. And it uses wind, waves, and currents, as well as a sea anchor to kind of keep this float afloat and keeping it moving and keeping the trash inside. Slide, please.
So this is just a little summary slide with like the biggest takeaways from everything that we just said. You know, from animals eating the plastics to how they accumulated there in the first place. This is just kind of a quick little rundown of that. And that's our presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Beach Bums. All right, we've had 3 presentations, a little bit marred by technical issues. I'm sorry for that. I think this is a matter of needing to practice ahead of time and you know, about how things are going to be loaded and how the transfers will take place. But I guess these technical problems are unavoidable, and I'm not going to mark off in particular because of that, because this is a difficult technology to master. Unfortunately, we don't really have well, there's time for a couple of questions if anybody had some questions about this. Any questions from the audience for the Beach Bums and their presentation on the garbage patch, which was an interesting sort of contrast to the other plastics presentations that we've had? Well, I have a question, which is this question of microbeads and microplastics in general. So the principal sources of microplastics are cosmetics, or are they like washing fleeces and other kinds of articles of clothing? What's the sort of relative contribution of these 2 sources? Do you know?
I'm not entirely sure which one is more significant in the ocean, but from a lot of the things that I've read, a lot of the microbeads do come from cosmetics. So a lot of them are used in like face washes and body washes, which are how most of them get down into the drain. So that's what I know. I'm not entirely sure about washing.
Huh. So I don't know much about cosmetics, but are there substitutes? Could they make cosmetics without microplastics, or is that something that's just absolutely necessary now?
So I did read in one of the articles that they are allowing, so these microplastics are banned, but they're allowing like biodegradable versions of them. I'm not entirely sure what they're made of, but they are looking for alternative solutions to these microbeads.
Okay. It just sort of comes to mind that, you know, one of the things we've studied is the oozes, the siliceous oozes that occur in the deep ocean below the carbonate compensation depth, where you know, the calcium carbonate tests are dissolved, but the silicate tests of diatoms and so forth are preserved. And you know, so these are microscopic little, you know, glass beads essentially. And I wonder if it would be possible to mine deep sea oozes for a source of microbeads that would be natural to the ocean. It's just a thought. I know that siliceous oozes have sometimes actually been used in spa kind of settings as an exfoliant and as a packaging. And so I wonder if silicon, you know, siliceous silicate beads might be a substitute for the plastic beads. What do you think, people who know about cosmetics?
I mean, I don't have any like research to back it up, but just personal experience. My go-to exfoliant is sea salt, which I'm pretty sure is better for the ocean than plastic, since it comes from the ocean in the first place.
Well, good for you, Kinsey. All right, well, and then, you know, I've also read that, you know, that fleeces, you know, these plastic fleeces, are not plastic fleeces, but they're, you know, that fleece material, that washing those produces these microfilaments, which are different from the microbeads that occur in cosmetics. But these are sort of just tiny lint-like particles of the, you know, the fleece material, and that they get into the water system and are also a source of microplastic pollution, you know, both in the food chain and other parts. So there are many, many sources, and plastics are interesting in that, you know, you can imagine, you know, adjusting your lifestyle to live without meat or, you know, gluten, or we give up lots of different things. Very, very difficult to give up plastics. You know, our society has really been structured around, you know, plastics being used for everything. And so, you know, you can see that it would be societary, you know, if society has to change, that's going to be a huge, huge challenge. All right, well, we'll stop there, and I guess I have the Castaways quiz, have the quizzes from the Beach Bums and the Coral Crusaders. Have they been uploaded to me or sent to Carrie? Do you know?
Yes, I sent the Beach Bums to Carrie.
Okay, and Coral Crusaders, have you sent your questions in?
Yeah, ours is attached to like the document that we sent in.
Okay, great. Well, we'll find all that. All right, so everybody, you've got the 3 quizzes from today's presentations that'll be on Canvas. And I think that the quality of the presentations, despite the technical problems, has been quite good. And I think everybody should, try to do equally well. But I would urge you all to practice ahead of time so that you know how all this is going to go, to try to make it more smooth. All right, everybody, thanks for your attention today. And, we'll carry on. We're closing in. We've got a couple more sessions. And I think this is working pretty well. So I'm quite pleased with the way this is going. And I'll see you Tuesday and online. I guess I'm going to meet with some people on Thursday morning, rather. And we'll get together again. So goodbye for now. Everybody take care of yourselves. Be safe.